The biggest problem I think that writers in general have, but the major publishing houses are investing in books written by celebrities or politicians. I don't know how many books and how many writers are lost in the process because of the way they operate.
H. Lee Barnes is the author of 10 books, including 4 novels and 4 short story collections. He was honored by the Vietnam Veterans of America with an Excellence in the Arts Award for his Vietnam War books, and in 2009, he was inducted into the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his career and latest book, Emerald City Blues. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, H. Lee Barnes.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike.
I'm very excited to have you here, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Okay, in 1975, I was state narcotics agent, and I got involved in a controversial shooting. And when all of the legalese involved in that was all cleared up and everything, I walked away from that career. Not that I had a lot of choice staying in it, but after the controversy. So the first thing I attempted was 2 years later, I decided to write that incident up as a novel. And it didn't come out very good because I was too close to it. It should be a memoir of sorts, I suppose. As a result, I learned that I had the discipline to write every day and that not all the writing was really terrible. So if we really want to go into how I became a writer as such, rather than a novelist, in police work, you have to write reports and they have to be narratives and they have to be clean. So generally speaking, everything you write is written in an active voice. And that carried forward when I began writing novels and short stories. So it wasn't so much that I was an imitator of Hemingway. It just came naturally because of the experience I had with writing as a police officer or a deputy sheriff and then a narcotics agent. So that's kind of how it all began.
Yeah, so way back when. I'm curious. I mean, I would love to dig into that story that sort of ended your career as a narcotics agent.
Well, it was a shooting up in Reno, north of Reno, 20 miles up north of there. And my informant was let's say, a little bit unreliable, if you will. And his name was Hugh Brandon Perry. He was later shot at the Liberace Museum in Las Vegas, trying to rob it, and he had held one woman captive and was out there, and she was wise enough to drop to the floor, and the cops that were out there shot and killed him. So that's kind of the end of it, but the beginning was that particular day. The suspect I shot and killed was James Charles Glosson, and he was ostensibly supposed to come with a load of dope, at least an ounce of heroin. And I was secreted in a closet watching the deal go down, but no deal went down. And when I looked, my informant started to leave by the back door, which was the bus signal, but nothing had happened. I looked back through the people that I had drilled, and I saw him with a gun. And I went, this is not right. And I came down the hallway, and he didn't surrender himself when I told him to drop the gun and everything. And so it ended up that I shot him, and he died. Then the sheriff's department got involved in it. They did not want a narcotics. This was a federally funded narcotics unit, and they didn't want them in the sheriff at the time. Bob Galley did not want them out in the county. And I'd already bumped heads with the chief deputy that was in charge of everything. And when he came out, because I had a detective friend that told me later on, a few days later, that his words were, I want that SOB. He didn't say SOB. That means me. And so, in part, the investigation they did was really clouded. And it went through legalese until it was finally dismissed with everything was dismissed with prejudice by a district court judge in Reno, which means, barring completely new evidence, they can't reopen anything. He couldn't declare it not guilty because there was no jury impaneled. This was he did this on a writ of habeas corpus, well, anyhow, there was a writ that was, and it was all dismissed based on proof that 3 of the witnesses who came forward to testify against me had actually perjured themselves.
Wow.
So you walk away from it. That's all you can do.
Yeah, but it sounds like that was sort of the end of your career in law enforcement.
Yeah, and I carried forward a little bit of bitterness, but between the writing and playing tennis and other things, I managed to suppress the anger and become productive again. Then I went back to college, of course, and got my graduate degree eventually from ASU, and it was all in writing, and started publishing short stories, and then worked towards getting books published. But it took me 20 years to get a book published.
Yeah, that's that's a long period of time, but certainly not an unheard of story. Success doesn't happen overnight for most writers. For most writers are doing it for years and years and years and decades before they even get the first taste of success.
Well, I'm still waiting for that $1 million check.
You and me both. I might have a better chance of winning the Powerball than getting $1 million check for writing. But
we'll take that. We'll take the Powerball too if we can get it.
I'll take it. Sure. It's. I always tell people, if you want to make a lot of money, don't become a writer. And if you really want to make a lot of money, don't become a podcaster who interviews writers, because I think we make less than the writers do. When did you know that you were really making it? When did you know that? When did you have the sense that you had a career, that you could make a career out of being a writer?
Probably the 3rd manuscript I wrote, which never ever got published, but it was a novel, and that's right. And that was in 1979 when I finished that. And I had an agent at the time, Phyllis Tornado, who sent it out. The title of it was A Medal for Joey, and it was a Vietnam novel. And oddly enough, all of the rejections, and there were 4 of them, I think, and they were from major publishing houses, all of them pretty much worded it the same way, that they didn't feel that the reading audience was ready for novels about Vietnam. Not yet, that it was too early. And so she kind of surrendered on it, and so did I, because I started another novel. And then I started writing short stories at the same time. So I was doing a lot of different writing. And in those days, it was a lot easier actually to get a publisher or an editor to look at your work. There were open doors at a lot of the publishing houses, and everything was done by snail mail. You sent your manuscript out, and they a copy of it, and then they sent it back to you with a rejection if they didn't. But I had one other agent after that. Since then, I've only managed to get one agent, and he didn't really push my work. So that's why I go to small publishers or university presses.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, are the backbone for publishing quality work, because they're not as interested. They want to make money off of it, of course, and survive, but at the same time, they're not quite as interested in making a profit off of every page, the way that major. And the biggest problem I think that writers in general have with publishing these days, major houses and everything else, is the major publishing houses are investing in books written by celebrities or politicians, and they give them $8 million advances or $3 million advances, or even more, I think, in some cases, and they have to earn that money back. That's a huge investment. I don't know how many books and how many writers are lost in the process because of the way they operate. If that
Yeah.
makes
That
if
makes
that makes
makes total sense. I mean, they're
yeah.
they're ask any aspiring writer looking for a big traditional publisher, and they'll tell you that you need to have I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, and of course, if it's your first time out of the gate, why would you have that many followers on social media? You haven't done anything yet, and they're
Yeah.
and they're it's a catch-22. It's like you need the big platform in order to get the deal, but you need the deal in order to get the big platform, unless you're buying your followers, which I'm sure people do. But I'm really curious as to you saying that it was that third manuscript that quote unquote wasn't a success because it didn't get published, but that's when you knew that you had something. To me, that's really interesting.
Yeah, well, that manuscript was the title of it was "And So Gods Die," and it was I created a hero. It actually was a fantasy, or would have fit into that territory. Uh, I had created a character named Axis, who fought in the second battle of the Cynocephali, and the gods, and he had this love, and the gods got involved because Apollo was interested in her too. And so there's that mixture of humanity and the Greek gods at play. And it never got anywhere because it was actually way too early for fantasy. Fantasy didn't catch on for another 10 years.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, that's when I started writing the short stories. But I knew it was successful because I had at least 4 people read it, who 2 of whom weren't avid readers, and they said they couldn't put it down. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try that again. But then I never visited fantasy after that.
Yeah. And then I'm just thinking about what you said about the Vietnam story in 1979, how the feedback was, publishers may not be ready for, readers may not be ready for it. You got to figure out what happened to my webcam here. Readers may not be ready for it. But then, Apocalypse Now was a big hit around that time period.
And
And
the film, yeah, I think that was slightly later, though. It was just,
okay.
and the difference between Metal for Joey and Apocalypse Now is Apocalypse Now actually appealed to the anti-war people, the sentiment that in that era, and A Metal for Joy was more about the grind of Vietnam.
Yeah.
There was and the friendships and those bonds that develop. In fact, it predated anything that, who's the guy that gets all the Vietnam writer that gets all the attention. Anyhow, it predated his work. And once he wrote the things they carried, and I think he had a memoir before that, and everything, it kind of opened up for Vietnam. And by that time, people, of course, were writing nonfiction historical novels about it.
Yeah. Well, let's move into the new one. What can you tell us about Emerald City Blues?
Well, okay, Emerald City Blues is actually a manuscript of the original manuscript. I started it 25 years ago. And I went to visit a friend of mine, a guy that I served with in Vietnam in Southern California. And I went to San Pedro. And walking the pier area of San Pedro was absolutely inspiring, because a good portion of it, as much as it was in World War II. And I went into the YMCA there, and it has been preserved. And that's where they used to have the dances and the rest of the stuff for the soldiers. And I got to thinking, there's a story here. I've just got to start it. So I started it, and then I set it aside. Then I restarted it, and I did another version of it. And I created a character, and much of the character that's in there is it's written in a first person in a female voice, which of course is not politically correct because I'm not a female. I suggest that when anybody picks the book up and reads it, they completely suspend the idea that this was written by a guy.
Yeah.
That'll help. But anyhow, so I got this female voice going, and I wanted a background for her. And so I borrowed much from my mother's background, small town in Washington, Eastern Washington, Palouse, and had her take the journey to Southern California with expectations. When she traveled, in her mind, she wanted Los Angeles and that area to be like the Emerald City in The Wizard of Oz, the movie that, of course, captured her when she was a younger teenager. So she arrives there, naive, but she's soon exposed. She's taken and she gets a job in the war industry, producing boots for the Marines in that area in San Pedro. And she works for a gentleman who's obviously got nothing but women working for him at that time. And she soon bonds with these other ladies, and they go through crises. There's problems with one of them gets pregnant and has to go to Mexico to get an abortion. And so it's these small adventures that they have. And then there's a blues singer. I nicknamed him Hard Times. His name is Howard Thomas in the book. And he is the traditional kind of blues singer from the Delta area, but he's not actually from the Delta area. He was reared in Los Angeles. But he takes it on. It's an art form, and by the way, I'm a fan of the old time blues, Muddy Waters and Lightning Hopkins and all of those. And so I created him to be a character who longed to actually suffer, because he never really had longed to suffer, to really feel what you have to feel to write the kind of blues that they did. And ultimately, they get together. And the big mistake that they make, of course, is he's black and she's white. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's the reality of the world. And so they go through the conditions of the time, and they're confronted over it in different ways. And they both share their doubts. So it's a romance that never really advances into a romance. Along the way, of course, there are 2 or 3 crises. I don't want to go into all of them. Sure. Because I want to tease the listeners out there.
Of course.
But she, along the way, learns through these crises that she goes through. One, that she's mature. Now she's a woman. 2, that she's courageous. 3, that she can understand that the system just doesn't work the way you want it to, but you still have to live within the confines of it and thrive within the confines of it. And she's a writer. She keeps a journal. So she's ultimately, when she goes through these experiences, everything, it's fodder for her. What she eventually wants to do is be a writer. And that's why it's written in the first person voice, because I wanted her to be a writer, reflecting back on what made her a writer. So sometimes it's interesting in fiction how your character becomes a writer. Sometimes it's interesting in life how you become a writer.
That's very true. Art can imitate life, and life can, also imitate art.
Yeah. So what else do you want to know about it?
No, I'm just, in terms of the challenges of writing in a first-person female voice. You mentioned it being somewhat, politically incorrect. Although, we as writers, we do step into the shoes of people who are not like us all the time. I mean, it's part of, it's almost part of the job description. Did you find it challenging, and were you sort of nervous doing that?
Actually, no. I fell right into it. I think that's one of the reasons that, in my opinion, the book is a success as a manuscript, not a manuscript, but as a project of art. Because it captured me. And there were times that I would be writing a scene or something, and I'd go, "Holy cow, where'd that come from?" And the other thing that I did was Selmo, the character that owns the bootery that has been converted to a boot manufacturer for the Marines. Selmo, he makes it a point to bring the war into the factory by having a presentation of the latest events that are occurring with the Allies, whether it's in the Pacific or in Europe. And of course, all of the women have relatives, husbands or other relatives that, for Eve, the main character, for instance, has three brothers who are all involved in the war. And so as the news comes through, it affects them in different emotional ways. Because if somebody is involved in D-Day, because they were with the airborne, then that would affect, and that was the case with Eve. When they hear about these battles, right away they emotionally identify with it. This is my brother, and he's at risk, and that makes that war, as far away as it is, that much closer.
Yeah.
People, I don't think that, being a Vietnam veteran myself, I don't think that our families experienced quite the same sense because of the way the war was covered when we were there. But in World War II, I mean, people would go to the movies and they would see these short clips. And in fact, there's a scene in there where they're sitting down and they're watching a short clip of what was going on in black and white in Europe. And it affects Eve because her brother's involved in it. And of course, there's others that are also involved. That's because the war was brought close to them in a different way. In Vietnam, I think the reporting was, for the most part, very, very distant from the action. And so people didn't ever get that real close-up sensibility that they had in World War II through the old black and white. And if you've ever watched clips, those old black and white clips of World War II, they are compelling. In fact, if they were in color, they would be far less compelling. Or if it was captured by television, there was something about the photographers and the voices of the reporters as they reported the incident that gave it a sense of immediacy that didn't otherwise get. So I tried to capture that through that sense of immediacy of the war for the characters involved in the book. But it's really about women.
Yeah. I think there's something too about watching those sort of war reels with a group of people, having a shared experience, versus watching it in your, on your TV in your living room, maybe alone, maybe with a couple of other people. But and certainly now, you're watching things on YouTube or on your phone. But I think there was something about that time period where you were together, you were with a group of, hundreds of people in a theater. That certainly plays into it as well.
That's very insightful on your part because that's true. I mean, we don't experience things together that way any longer. Even if you go to the movies now, I've gone to the movies probably 4 times in the last 3 years, and movie theaters, the audience is thin. You don't hear them talking about it as they go out and everything. The way that when before television took over and the whole. I mean, we can't reverse any of that and go back to it. That's occurred.
I kind of wish we could, though. I think we're first of all, we're fragmented as a society, just personally. we're all fragmented, but even with things like, TV. I remember early on in my career, of course, the show Seinfeld was one of the biggest shows, when I was sort of coming up in my career. And if you missed Seinfeld on Thursday night, you were not in the loop at the water cooler the next day. Like, you were just left out of a conversation. It's not like that anymore. I mean, nobody, it's, there's a lot of fragmentation on demand. I wish we could go back in time, but this is because I'm becoming an older man now and I'm nostalgic for the way things used to be.
Yeah, well, we all go through that, I guess. But here's the beauty of the book. Or any book that draws you into it and keeps you there. At least you can individually you can have that broader experience, but you get by having the intimate moments that you share with a narrative as it evolves on the page. Uh, it's not quite, but I don't know about you, but when I get a book, I have about 3 or 4 friends here where I live, because I live in 5 acres out in the desert on a house that's way too big for one guy, but I have 3 or 4 friends out here actually, and what I do is after I read a book, I pass it on to them, and then we don't talk about it in great detail or anything, but what we do is we fortify one another that was a good experience reading that book. And I think that we've got, and you're a writer too, so we got to preserve this art that we have. It's a special kind of art of communication that doesn't exist on television or even in the theater or anything like that. It's because that very direct contact with your reader can't be. There's no substitute for it.
No, I mean you're literally building relationships with people that you will never ever meet in your life.
Yeah,
And of course you're leaving yourself on the page too. So that's something that I always have to remember, is that even though I write fiction, you are leaving a little bit of yourself on every page that you write.
that's true. Yeah.
I'm curious. I always like to get to know my guests a little bit more through a couple of pop culture questions, and I don't have too many for you, but just being a Vietnam veteran, do you have a favorite? Out of all the movies about Vietnam that have come out over the years, is there one that's comes to you as either being your favorite or one that really got it right?
Yeah, I can't think of the title of it off the top of my head, but it's the one with the Marines in I Corps during the Tet Offensive, and uh, I think that one probably more than any other. Uh, that probably is the best of them. Uh, the others, it seemed to me, were too political. They're a definite slant. Because
Yeah.
like these guys are all they're either rabid or they're victims as soldiers. That's kind of how they do it, how they present it. But I wish I could name 3
I'll
of them.
name a couple. Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket. That's it.
Was that the one? Yeah, that was.
Yeah, that's the one.
Matthew Modine and Vincent D'Onofrio was in that one. It was a very well cast. It's a tough movie.
Yeah, and I thought it captured something very, very important. The closest film that I think I ever saw that really captured the sensibility of soldiers in combat and everything else, believe it or not, Saving Private Ryan.
Mm.
And it's because that opening scene, in all that chaos, somehow soldiers manage to organize and be effective. And because there is that initial chaos if you've ever come under fire, but it seems like chaos to everybody who would be watching it from outside. But most soldiers just simply react. there's something between the adrenaline and everything else that's going on in the brain at that time that tells him, just put that rifle to your shoulder, sight it, pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And it just happens. You don't, having been in firefights, you don't think about it, and you certainly don't turn and run, because that's not what you're taught to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That movie, just that, you're right. That opening scene, it's something. I mean, that's hard to forget. Just watch.
And amazing at every level.
Yeah.
Yeah. From cinematography down to the individual acting. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. My grandfather was part of that. He was a field surgeon in World War II, and he's part of
Oh my God.
Normandy, and he was captured at and forced to perform surgery on German officers at gunpoint. And thankfully, they all lived, and he was let go. But that is it's.
Have you written about that?
I you know what, I haven't, and it's been in the back of my mind. I've never tackled a historical book like that, and I tend not to write nonfiction except the stuff I do for my career. So I don't know where that will show up at some point in time. I just don't know where, when, or how, but it's in the back of my mind.
Because it's a great premise for a story, fiction, or a nonfiction piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
H. Lee Barnes, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm curious, where can people learn more about you? Do you have a website? Are you active on social media? Do you have anything we can share with listeners?
I would say I'm semi-active. I have two websites. I have one that's H. Lee Barnes, and I have one that's Lee Barnes. And I don't post a lot. I probably should more, but I was reared in a family where you don't draw attention to yourself. In fact, when I found out about these couple of interviews that I'm doing and everything else, I told the publicist, I said, that's not me. I don't mind talking about things, but drawing attention to yourself is just difficult.
Well, it's one of those necessary evils for certain people, especially if you want to move a couple copies. And I know your publicist somewhat well, and I'm sure she did not take your resistance as a for an answer.
No. I'll tell you what. If you write that book about your grandfather in some way, I will be happy to look at the manuscript in its form, and I will blurb it. I mean, that sounds like something that would would interest me.
All right. Well, we will keep in touch on that, because challenge accepted. H. Lee Barnes.
Okay, you've got my email.
Yeah, I do. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation. I want to say thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and giving me the honor of uncorking yours.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.